Hey everyone, I already gave a presentation about WebAssembly at one of the meetings, I think about a month ago. I'm just going to do a little bit of an intro, and then I expect this to be mostly discussion, time to ask questions. I asked Luke Wagner, who is one of the folks who pushed WebAssembly forward and works on WebAssembly for Mozilla, to join me, and he can help answer questions. So let me share my screen real quick. Okay. Whoops. Is that sharing? That's sharing the wrong one, isn't it? Do you all see WebAssembly ES module integration?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. So I went through these slides. I'm just going to go over the goal again and also the WebAssembly specific parts. So the goal is basically when you are currently using a WebAssembly module, you have to manually fetch the WASM module, and then you have to manually set up the imports. Then you have to pass those imports into instantiate streaming, so you have to manually instantiate it. And then finally, you can actually use the function. And so what we want to do is move towards a declarative API. This will help make WebAssembly module instantiation easier, but it will also make it possible for WebAssembly modules to take part in JavaScript module graphs. So I want to talk a little bit more about what exactly a WebAssembly module is. So I have a post about this. The WebAssembly module is what you get back from WebAssembly instantiate eventually. When you call WebAssembly instantiate, you pass in the source. So you pass in the binary that you got. What you get back is a promise, because WebAssembly can take a while to compile if you have a large module. And so you get this promise back that will resolve once the module has been instantiated with the JavaScript API. So you get this compiled module, but you will also passed in all of your initialized imports. And so the imports object, the kinds of imports that you can bring into a WebAssembly module, there are 4 different kinds. You can have values. So these are WebAssembly types, things like integers and floats. You can have functions. You can have memory, which is basically just an array of bytes. And you can have tables, which are arrays of a particular kind of element. Right now, the only kinds of tables that are supported are for functions. So those are the 4 kinds of imports that you can have. So let me jump ahead in the slides. So if we were to move towards an ES module API approach, what would that look like? It would look a lot like the way that JavaScript does ES modules when we're talking about construction. The loader would fetch the files, and then we would parse them into module records. We would create the WebAssembly module at this point, parse them into module records with a requested modules property, so that the loader can then look at that requested module property and load whatever files it needs. So this doesn't change too much from what you do with JavaScript. For instantiation, basically any functions that are being exported from a JavaScript module that a WebAssembly module depends on, those will be pulled in, and they'll have live bindings, but any values that you have in JavaScript, because we don't have a way in WebAssembly of understanding JavaScript types at this point, any values are going to have to be snapshotted when they're pulled in an instantiation. And then the different kinds of import and export types you can have, the functions, the values, well, the globals, memories and tables will be initialized in the WebAssembly module. So that happens, you don't actually need to evaluate code to make those to initialize those. So in the same way that functions can be initialized during instantiation in JavaScript, we'll be able to do that with those WebAssembly types. And then for evaluation, we're going to run what's called the start function. It's basically just this function that you can run to prepare things before the end of module and the module instantiation. So what are the problems? We've talked a little bit about this before, but the understanding of this has changed a little bit since we last talked about it. Basically, we are going to be able to enable JavaScript and WebAssembly cycles. There are going to be some gotchas in the short term. For example, what I mentioned before about having the JavaScript values snapshotted. That means that they don't have live bindings. And the problem with that is that at instantiation time, values are undefined. So these kinds of value imports really just aren't going to work too well in the short term. But we will be able to have JavaScript and WebAssembly cyclic dependencies. WebAssembly to WebAssembly cyclic dependencies are trickier. And we aren't planning to enable these in the short term. Now, you will be able to have WebAssembly in cycles with JavaScript just as soon as you introduce another WebAssembly module in the cycle itself, not an acyclic dependency. Having this WASM file at the top of the tree is fine, but having the one that's in the cyclic dependency with the other one is not going to work. Bradley did talk about the source text module record being the only thing that can be in a cycle right now with other source text module records. What we need to do is because right now the abstract module record only has an instantiate. The API it provides only gives you instantiate. It doesn't give you any information about whether or not other things, the status basically of the instantiation of things in the cycle. And so what the JavaScript spec needs to be able to, the reason that that language is in the module spec is because when you have the cycle, you want to be able to make sure that it all switches over to instantiated or evaluated at the same time, and that you don't have parts of it that say that they're instantiated and parts that error it out. So we need a way to collect that, keep that information. And the way to do that is to create a new type of module record that's a base class, that's an abstract class, which both source text module records and WebAssembly can then be based on. So that's just something that needs to change in the spec, but it should be pretty straightforward. So I wanted to open it up for any questions that people had about this. And let me see if I switch my screen. Do people see my screen switching, or do you still see these slides?
Yeah, I added. It just shows the agenda queue.
Okay.
I was curious if there are loader hook concerns that you're trying to satisfy. I know for JavaScript, a big loader hook is code instrumentation. I don't think I've heard any similar use cases coming out of the WebAssembly world right now where you're instrumenting things as they're loaded.
Luke might be able to talk more to, have you heard of any use cases around loader hooks, Luke?
I mean, people have talked generally, about fancy things one might be able to do to like mutate a WASM module. So the existing JS loader hooks, will they actually like take the source text and just output totally different source text?
We do not allow that. We only have really one hook that I encourage using, which is take a URL, generate a new URL.
Oh.
So you could, in theory, write something to disk right now, or we could allow you to create in-memory module records that could be loaded, but you only can redirect roughly.
Okay. Well, would that work analogously with WASM?
That is up in the air, but I presume you are using the same import structure where it's a string.
Right. So maybe that part could be shared?
Yes, I think so. I was just curious if there were existing people looking to have like people loading different WASM files if you're in development, production.
Oh, you could definitely imagine
coverage.
that being possibly useful, having both debug and opt builds, debugs with, more assertions and all that.
Okay, that was my topic.
So it sounds like there's not too, it looks like there's nobody else in the queue that has any questions.
I mean, I can ask questions for days. That's why I don't. So I guess I'll ask one other question. Or no, Wes has a hand up. He can go first.
Just quick question for Brett. In ESM, Node doesn't load JSON right now, right?
It allows you to load JSON, C++ files, and common JS files.
Okay, and they just appear as the default. Got it. All right. I guess the only thing that internally there's a well-defined mechanism for layering these new import kinds on top of one another, like WASM, C++, JSON, CJS. It's just kind of weird that it's not exposed for people to hook into yet. I say yet because I know it might be, but Resolve is like only halfway there.
Guy Bedford has his hand up, and I guess he's replying.
Yeah, just on that same topic, I mean, it seems like, well, we've got this WebAssembly PR that's just handling it via file extension. Does that seem like the way things will go? We can rely on the .wasm extension as the way in which Node will disambiguate that import. Sorry, what's the question, Claire? Just knowing that a .wasm file is the primary indicator to import WebAssembly, does that sound like the right approach? Are we all happy with that?
So what we're planning to do for the HTML spec is use the MIME type. If there's a MIME type database, then that would work there as well. But if there's not, then I think that the file extension probably is the best indicator.
Yeah, we are registering .wasm with IANA, the MIME, as associated with application/wasm.
So just looking at this PR that we have on Node, I mean, do you think that this is something that we should be moving forward with, or do you think we should be working with a more close knit C++ integration of WASM? I mean, what would you suggest from an implementation perspective?
So when you say a more close C++, I'm not sure what...
Sorry, I mean through the V8 API to handle things like the circular references and module records. Yeah, I
would say that delegating that to V8 makes a lot of sense because I think it is going to be pretty complicated. And the V8 team is very interested in both prototyping and implementing this. But I don't know from a technical perspective whether or not there are any roadblocks to doing it within Node if you did want to prototype independently.
Gus has his hands up. So Gus worked on a PR to integrate WASM into Node. That basically follows a lot of what you described. I mean, I believe it doesn't handle circular references at the moment, he said, but Gus can explain more.
Sure. I created the PR because I didn't know that the WASM people were working to get WASM importable. And ideally, my PR should never be merged. But, and like ideally, V8 would just, sorry for the, own the implementation for taking source module attack. You know what I'm saying? And my PR wouldn't have to, like, we shouldn't have to manually wire it all up the way we are. If that makes sense.
Miles, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'd like to volunteer to help, with communicating and chatting with the V8 team, if that's helpful at all. So anyone who, we have a number of V8 team members who are actually collaborators on the project. And Benedict is actually a member of this working group. I think they've generally missed the calls because of timing. We haven't been super Europe friendly with the current time that we have. But I'm more than happy if there's action items on this to take it up with the V8 team and see if we can maybe get together some sort of roadmap or timeline, or at least answer if these are things that we can explore.
So I don't know if Benedict will have the most up-to-date information on this. Bradley Nelson might be a person on the V8 team that is keeping track of this.
For the WASM related stuff, yeah.
For the WASM related stuff.
I can reach out to Brad.
I can't raise my hand, but I want to have a throwback to what Wes was saying. I think we didn't fully resolve it. So right now we do let you create custom heuristics for formats, and you can detect a .wasm file and then send it through dynamic instantiate. So what's currently being done with this WASM PR is doable with loader hooks.
Yeah, right. I was just trying to get at the fact that like feeding everything through dynamic via dynamic instantiate kind of makes it feel a lot less first class than if there were just a way to register like formats for that format parameter in the first place.
Ah, okay. I misunderstood. I completely agree. Hi. So the queue is empty. I don't see any chat. Do we have anything on YouTube? I want to do one final check because this is our last talk.
It doesn't look like there's been anything for some time on.
Cool. So yeah, that's it. We survived 8 hours. Yeah, it was long, but I think it was really good. We got through a lot of topics. So yeah. Does anybody have things they want us to like be aware of or take away from this that feels actionable? Okay, well, I guess that's it for me.
Wonderful. I'm gonna spin down the stream now. We still have 15 people on the call. This is really amazing. Thank you everyone who put all the time in, and thank you so much, Brad, for organizing.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks.